This is what we're trying to do through this can. We also have a representation coming on board from the population that we're trying to serve, with 18 to 24-year-olds as our target market, males of color in particular. But we started with a global target, and it's pretty aggressive. It's a visionary, aspirational, but we're going to do it. All youth in Adams and Broomfield counties are employed at a wage that allows them to support their basic needs, self-sufficiency. We're honing in on our SMART target right now. We want to make sure that we're very clear on the data that's required in Adams and Broomfield counties. But trust me, it is the most marginalized populations that we're looking at right now. Let's dive into the numbers here for Northglenn. The overall unemployment rate right now in Adams County is about 3.1%. Full employment for this region is about 2.8%. So we've been hovering at full employment for some time now, which you would think would be great. But when you look around the city of Northglenn, you can see the unemployment rate is somewhere between 5 and 9%. So not everyone is sharing in full employment. This is one of those pockets that is experiencing a little bit more unemployment. It's about 2% higher than the rate in Colorado, and sometimes a little bit higher when you dive deeper into the census data in certain particular pockets of the city. So we have the labor force in 16 to 24-year-olds. So you're going, well, why is a 16-year-old count in the labor force? Well, that's just how the census data is pulled, and that's the best we can get right now. But about 59% of the labor force in total in America is in this age group, 65% in Colorado, and then in Adams County, it goes all the way up to 68%. So it's a very large percent of the population in that group. So that's why we picked this global target, and specifically why we're honing in on this group, because it's a big number. This is how we've performed in the self-sufficiency standard over time. So between 14 and 17, we've had a pretty good steady increase in the number of all ages who have been able to earn a self-sustaining wage. And it's actually not done too bad in our target market, 18 to 24. But that you can attribute to a better economy, to employers lowering their standards. And we do expect this, if all conditions remain the same, this number will plateau out. So it's not going to get much better than it is today. So the number will continue to stay about where it is, or even grow higher, is what we're predicting, depending on how the economy does. So why do we use the self-sufficiency standard? Well, to pay basic expenses, it's often higher than the living wage and a minimum wage. So when you look at the living wage, it's usually a bit lower. Standard captures the bare bones of what you need to meet their basic needs. In Adams County, this is what's a little, I know you kind of go, are you kidding me? The self-sufficiency standard, this is according to both state and national data, is now $13.11 an hour. That's for a single adult. That's about $28,000 a year. The living wage is $12.95 an hour, and the minimum, as you know, in our state right now is $10.20 an hour, and will continue to go up. So $13.11 is higher than what most employers are paying on average. But when you add just one child to a household, the self-sustaining wage almost doubles immediately. So it goes all the way up to $25 an hour. If you add an infant and have a preschooler at the same time, it's $36. If you add another adult, you add $15.13 per hour per adult to that household. So it starts to rack up pretty considerably at that point.
And I'll just share, we have one of the highest proportions of young people to adults in the state of Colorado, and we always have. And the most common denominator of a family unit in the partnership is an adult with one child.
So if you have any questions at all, because we're going to dive into some more numbers right now, but just let me know. This is the most common jobs in this category of youth that we have. Educational, actually overall in the sustainable wage, not just youth. So educational services and healthcare, the median earnings in Colorado a little bit much higher than what we have here in Adams County. Scientific management, admin, waste management services. Again, we are much lower on the scale when you look at that, what we're paying right now. Retail, about par with what they're paying around the state. Arts, entertainment, recreation, a little bit lower. And construction, which always surprises people, because you hear that we've got a lot of construction trades that are making a lot of money. If you are a certified plumber or electrician, and you can pull 6 figures, but that's when you get to the journeyman stage, and that's after about 4 to 8 years on the job before you get to that level. So this is just starting out at that wage right there. The estimated hourly wage in Adams County, this is starting from kind of top to bottom, and this is based on the number of jobs that are currently being hired or open. And as you can see, the hourly wage is equated down to the bottom there. Self-sufficiency is 13. It's kind of in that black bar. So you can see there's really, there are quite a number of jobs, but again, this is for single person. But as Becky pointed out, most of the people we're talking about are in that plus one, a preschooler, and there are only about 4 categories that would offer that kind of self-sustainable wage right now. So do we have a lot of jobs available? Yes, we do. Are they paying self-sustaining wages? Not necessarily. And do our youth have the qualifications to move into those? No. So the economic impact, if you're the average worker earning under the self-sufficiency standard, you're pulling in about $14,000 a year. Self-sufficiency for one adult in Adams County is $28,000. So what we're looking at doing to get to the self-sustaining wage, we're almost having to double to just elevate you to what we need and what our SMART target is. And the economic impact potential is huge. Not only are we going to change lives, but we're looking at pumping about $14 million more annually into the economy. That's about 1,000 people, only 1,000 people. And we're looking at a target population of 15,000.
Ooh, we can do it.
We can do it.
So in order to really do this, though, we know that the work needs to be rooted in data, but we have to remember behind every number is a child. And this is from my friend Dan Ryan in Portland. And then the other guiding and operating principle we have to this work is that there is something fundamentally amiss about building or rebuilding a system without consulting at any point, though it is designed to serve. And so what we have really done over the last year, we're really proud of, is that the Youth Initiative is been selected as an international pilot for a strategy we endearingly call TEGA. And TEGA stands for Technology Enabled Girl Ambassadors. This is a program that came out of the UK that is supporting young women from our community to be trained in an international recognized certificate to be a digital interviewer. And so this has been a complete game changer for our work. Right when we were adopting our goals, we were able to interview young people, employers, and families of really what is the story behind these numbers. You're going to school, you might be going to Bowman Tech, but how are we not connecting the dots? Employers need workers, young people need jobs, and we are just not connecting the dots. And so TEGA is really how we use lean research in real time. We're able to use really smaller sample sizes, concise interviews, and the right people. I'm proud to let you know that there's 2 young women from Northglenn who have been TEGAs, and thank you for looking at you, Jenny, that got interviewed. It really has helped us shine a light on the gap of the themes of really what is the story behind here, so we actually can roll up our sleeves and do the right work for the kids here in Adams County. So right off the bat, when we were looking just at youth employment in general, the themes that came up from our respondents is that they really just didn't have access to information, especially our young men of color. How do they get information about jobs, resume writing, et cetera, et cetera? This was kind of a universal theme. They really needed opportunities for more real-life context and understanding as it connects those dots, and that technology is the youth's greatest strength. But the cost of living in Adams County is absolutely skyrocketing. So those were kind of the universal themes that we helped to kind of dive into making this difference. So the methodology doesn't claim to discover or identify solutions, but rather to triangulate the data, right? So we have census level data, we have school district data, we have municipal data. Now we're using TEGA research to really color in the dots and really make sense of what this data means. So I'm going to turn it over to Janet, who's going to bring us home of really what are we doing about this?
So when Greg was talking about the work that we're doing as we travel together as a team and that Strive Together has supported for us, when we get locked together for those days at a time and have to come up with strategies and then relook at those strategies. So what we're doing is taking everything that we just talked about and sitting down together and saying, so what do we do with this and how are we going to move forward? And so where we are with Project Learn right now is where we currently stand with what we've put together in terms of information so far. And so, one of the things that we've come to the understanding is that we need to expand students' access to dual enrollment opportunities. And when we say dual enrollment, a lot of people think, well, that's concurrent enrollment. That's when kids are getting college credit while they're in high school. And that's one of the things that can happen. But really, how are they also dually enrolled in all those other opportunities that aren't necessarily 2 or 4 year college that are intended to earn a degree? So things like apprenticeships and internships and certifications and, one of the things we know for sure, and this is really what brings my passion to this work, is that we're not going to move the needle for 18 to 24-year-olds if we start that when they're 18. And we also know that the opportunities that are available to students once they graduate from high school are going to cost them money that don't necessarily have to cost them anything while they're still with us in the K-12 system. And so we have a huge potential to be able to move that needle with what we can offer while they're still with us that's already funded. And so that's really where my passion comes in this work, is how do we contribute to that? So taking what we're already doing and making sure that we do it better and we do it right. And so making sure that we expand those opportunities for students and figuring out how do we do that? Because one of the things we know for sure is that not a lot of people want to let an under 18-year-old apprentice with them. We have not cracked that nut yet, right? And so we know that we have to find a way to make that happen. So does that mean that we look at the impacts that our current laws have on whether or not people are able and willing to do that? What are the incentives for companies to do that? So that's just a start, is to say we know we need to do it. Next, we'll have to figure out how. The other thing is to expose youth to a variety of career options at an earlier age. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. There are a lot of things happening in K-12 across that continuum and even on into post-secondary if the students continue on to community college that are providing them with information about career options. What we know, though, is that not every kid gets everything. Right? There are a few things that every student has the opportunity to participate in, and a whole lot of stuff that's kind of hit and miss whether or not you actually get that, okay? And then the other thing was to ensure that each high school student has a navigator. And what we're talking about there is that one of the things in the work that we've done in the career and tech ed space in Adams 12 and really across the state, one of the things that we've learned is we are preparing students to enter the workforce, and the workforce has a need for these people, and they're not finding each other. They're not connecting. And so how do we help students navigate through that system so that that connection is starting to happen in a more consistent way? Especially, like we talked about, for our most marginalized group of students who may or may not be, your straight A, sitting on student council, gets invited to everything student. Okay? So that leads us to the next stage, which is Project Way to the Workforce, which says, so we know that we need to have a close and intentional engagement of youth, parents, employers through this process. So we need to make sure that we're talking to the individuals that this work is intended to benefit. And finding out not just why, like we talked about with Ortega, is not just what we know or think we know about why these connections aren't happening, but why don't they think they're happening, and what do they need, and what would meet this need for them. So strategic and incremental improvements to existing supports and programming. We know that we need to coordinate what we're doing better. This is one of the things I love about ACYI and the work that I'm getting involved in, is that there are these little pockets all over the place of we provide this, we provide that, we provide this, and we do a really bad job, a poor job a lot of times of talking to each other and coordinating our efforts. And so really being intentional about how we do that better so that we can implement systems change, not just one little after-school program or something like that. Okay? And then the last thing is development of additional supports and programming as they're identified. One of the things we talked about with that is that we can provide an internship or an apprenticeship for a student. We can maybe get them that apprenticeship while they're still in high school. We can maybe even give them high school credit for doing that. That doesn't impact the district's per pupil amount, right? Some strategies that we're looking at how we can accomplish. But that student may not have a way to get there. We can get them a welding apprenticeship, but if they can't buy the steel toe boots, and they can't buy the jacket, and they can't buy the hood, and they can't, then we're not really accomplishing much of anything. So making sure that we're being very intentional about those supports that are needed for our students.
I think for the sake of time, I'm just going to go right over to Greg.
So policy is going to have to shift a little bit. So we never can have enough money, right? There's never enough, but we don't want to duplicate services. So when we look at policy shifts that need to happen, one that I believe Representative Mullica signed on board with Representative Byrd in sponsoring just this last session and getting passed out was a per pupil reimbursement act that became law. So now we are looking at doing a pilot program, hopefully up in this district, that will allow us to incentivize the districts to allow more students to go out on apprenticeships and internships. Because right now, if you're not in the classroom, you're not getting reimbursed. So there's, I'll speak for the, you don't have to, but I will speak for the districts that they're not incentivized to do that. They want to keep them in the classroom. That's just business. So this is a great new model that's opening up some great opportunities. The other thing is we have to understand that without employer incentives, this is probably going to be an uphill battle. And so how can we work creatively with some of our legislators to look at very creative ways of incentivizing our employers to increase that per hour reimbursement? Perhaps it's through tax incentives, rebates, we're not quite sure, but we're really going to start pushing that and trying to get creative as we move into this next session, and there is an appetite to talk about that.
Just to kind of round it out, really the role of the CAN is to lift up the opportunities for resource alignment and policy alignment. And those will be the things that Janet and Greg will lift to the Community Leaders Council and the call to action, hopefully for local legislation here. So next steps, Janet?
So next steps are action planning around our strategies. So, there are these ideas about what we want to accomplish, but how exactly are we going to do it? And what are our first steps? And what are our next steps? And so getting even more specific about what this work is going to look like. Asset mapping, and really what that is we're currently looking at all of those services and supports that we talked about that are already available out there, getting all of those mapped so that we can figure out how those can work together. What's already out there and how do we access that? And how do we pull those resources together? So that's something we're actively working on. And then the last thing is landscape analysis for policies. One of the things that Greg was talking about, how do we leverage that? So when we were in Washington, D.C. and we were working on our strategies, I got an email from CDE saying, hey, districts are going to be able to pilot what he was just talking about. And so, while we're there, we're making those phone calls and saying, so how do Adams County districts pilot? Because that you're saying your pilots have to be rural and they can be only 5,000 students or less. But what if Adams County wanted to come together to say, we want to pilot, and here's why we think you should allow us to do that. Here's what's special about what we're doing. So reaching out and making sure that we're, not taking no for an answer when there are opportunities. Doesn't say it on here, but one of the other things that we've talked about is, districts have been incentivized all across the state for the past couple of years for certifications that are earned by our students in our district. I know this past year the state was able to pay the full $1,000 per certification earned by each student in all of the districts across the state. And so for some districts, we have a lot of students earning a lot of certifications. So the state does not tell us how we have to spend that money. So is there a way to look at allocating that funding to come back to this purpose, rather than just saying a check goes to school districts and they just spend it on whatever they spend it on? Really, the intent of that was to continue to have more and more students become certified and employed. And so how do we get really intentional about that money that's already out there and focusing on it on this work?
Your turn. Questions for us?
Questions?
I'll start. So a question that I have for you guys is, so I really appreciate all this work that you guys are doing about employment for our youth and really preparing them for just the economy that we live in, the life that they'll need to have, the rent payment they're going to need that month. I mean, I think this is huge that we have so much effort, so much work. Such a great, you guys, it sounds like an amazing project. So I'm really excited that this is happening. So one of the things that I'm really interested in, just personally, is graduation rates. How do you see this work impacting your graduation rates across Adams County?
I mean,
is there any correlation between the two?
absolutely, right? So when we look at national and state and local strategies and interventions that are moving the needle towards this, I mean, it really goes all the way back to kindergarten. But when we specifically look at high school graduation rates and we think about things like concurrent enrollment and dual enrollment, we're supporting that young person to have the motivation and the interest to see that that's a stepping stone to the next thing. So, I mean, you have a front row seat to that.
I think I can just speak anecdotally with what we see with our students, but I know what we've seen. It's my 15th year now working in current tech ed in the state, and you know, definitely what we see is there are a fair percentage of our students who don't see relevance in what they're learning and doing in school. And it's not that they can't, it's that they really don't want to. You know, what have you done for me lately? How does this connect with what I want to be and do? And giving them the opportunity. I know there are students that come to Bowman Tech, not just bragging on my school, but say, you know, what I do here is my whole reason for coming to school. That's why I come to school, because I know if I quit at my comprehensive high school, I can't come here anymore. And I think if we can take that to that next level of getting them out there in the community so we can do that warm handoff. So while they're still ours, we're connecting them to that next step. And they can get paid for that apprenticeship. They can start helping and supporting their family, which might be a reason they're dropping out of high school because they have to help and support their family. They can do that while they're apprenticing. And so it gives them the so what for those students who don't see a so what in what we're providing for them.
And the reason why I'm just really passionate about graduation rates is there's a lot of public health data that shows the social determinants of health and health equity, and how simply by graduating high school has a profound impact, not only the quality of life you'll have, but how long you actually live. And so I've looked at our data here in Adams County, specifically in Northglenn. You could put your zip code in a little social determinants of health calculator. And I mean, you could see how much just living in this zip code impacts your health. And a lot of it draws back to graduating and being able to join the workforce in a productive way. And so I think this has amazing.
Well, and I'll just put a spin on it. So our high school graduation rate, it's 10% less for boys in our partnership, right? So when we think about that, the target population for this work is boys of color. It's because there's so much less of them graduating.
Yeah.
Like really, that's where that number comes from. That's the 15,000 right there.
Yeah. No, well, and I experienced that when I was in high school. So I graduated in 04 from Skyview, and I can even tell you how many of the males that I went to school with freshman year, they were gone. Everyone was gone by the time we graduated senior year. They were all gone. And so it's so important, the work that you're doing, to see that change. I mean, we've seen some great changes here in Northglenn, with Northglenn High and everything like that, but there's still so much work to do. And so I think, if anything, I'm just very excited about your work. And, you know, what else can we do as a council to help support some of the work that you're trying to do?
Well, next Friday, we have an all-play meeting, we call it, where all of the CAN comes together. And so, I mean, really the call to action in working with Heather is like, who's the best person that is got a front row seat to that here in Northglenn, and we would love for you to join us. And then once the call to action comes around resource alignment and policy alignment, I mean, that really is help us help you. I mean, at the end of the day, we have a lot of resources in Adams County. Nothing like Denver County has. We have the data for that. But if we were just able to reallocate and align the funding that we already have in this community to this, then we're going to start seeing the needle move. And so, I mean, my last call to action is that there is a lot of young people in our community that live in poverty. And we need to keep supporting those non-for-profits to support that. But we also need to start having a conversation in our partnership about the difference between good charity and outcomes-driven work. We have to do both in order to really break the cycle of poverty. So be ready for our call to action.
And I would add to what Becky shared, one of the things that we're going to work with her and her staff on is looking at the outreach approach that council provided me direction on the youth vaping discussion that we had. that we conduct an outreach with youth. And because they have the resources they have, Becky and I were talking one day, and it dawned on me that we could utilize them to help us figure out and strategize an outreach to gather data to bring back to council on that specific topic. So we did have to reschedule that meeting because some other things came up, but we're planning on having that meeting, and then we'll use their resources and their knowledge of how they've approached problem solving with other community issues for this particular issue, and that'll inform what we bring back to council, hopefully by the end of the year.
I mean, said a different way is we'll be the neutral facilitators and coaches to support you using your data so that you all can come together and make decisions based on the local data here. From the school district, the city, all the data mining. And it's the same process that these folks have been going through. It's the recipe of success. Start with need, look at data, what drives it up, what drives it down. We'll help walk through that process.
Just two quick things, not necessarily directly related, but from the employer standpoint, I think the challenge with employers is seeing the disconnect of the HR side of things, right? So there's always a hurdle in ensuring accountability that students are going to show up and are going to do the internships, and you're already dealing with that with your regular workforce. And so I think that becomes a barrier for employers to just understanding the accountability. I've had the benefit of having several high school interns, and I think what turned the corner for me to take that on was that there was accountability coming from the school. There was reports, there was documentation for the sign-off, and when I didn't have that, I felt like the relationship wasn't as strong and wasn't as good, and the accountability was missing. So I think that's probably a really important part with the hurdle, and incentivizing is going to be a really important key. And my last question is just the barrier in Adams County with transportation. Just kind of curious if there's something that is being looked at with the partnership. I mean, an employer might be completely on board and a student might be on board, but then the transportation isn't necessarily there.
Transportation was identified as one of the top 3 barriers in getting these students, because right now if you work with CareerWise has honed in their apprenticeship opportunities to within 3 miles of a school. And so if you're in a corporate desert, there's not a big company 3 miles around. And Janet, you experience this with your students as well. So yeah, we're looking at partner. RTD is not an option for us in Adams County, as you all know. So we're looking at other alternatives, Uber, Lyft, any kind of transportation.
There's some really innovative models happening in the nation. St. Louis.
Yeah, in St. Louis, they're using Uber and Lyft, both, that are subsidized.
We will actually do bus passes. Like we'll pay for the bus passes for the employees that want to go that route.
So, I mean, there just has to be that kind of connection where employers are willing
And that's
to help.
the strategy around the Navigator is having that one-on-one conversation. What's preventing you from getting here? How do we problem solve? We have other non-for-profits that's whole core mission is to provide resources for kids. How are they at the table making that strategic call to action so that this cohort of kids is trying to get to this job?
It's one of the things that we've talked about through, trying to pull strategies together is that that navigator is unique. When we talk about a navigator, my background is a school counselor. I know what school counselors do, and this is not necessarily the niche of a school counselor. Because like you're talking, it's very specialized and very, us school people aren't always the best person to talk with an organization or a company or business. Because we talk our edu-speak and they look at us like, I don't know what that means, and what have you done for me lately, right? And so, figuring out, we talked about really the importance of being really clear about who are the people that are doing this work and making sure we don't just hire any teacher and say, we trust you to do this. You need to really have the skill and the knowledge to do it. And then what are those resources and somebody who can really scrap and figure that out that isn't always necessarily us school people. It doesn't mean it necessarily can't be our money that's used to do it, but we have to be a little more outside of the box in the way that we think about the
Those
work.
are those people that start with yes in their heart. Those are the ones.
Yes.
Okay, well,
Thank you for your time.
we feel like we like to be on time, so thank you for the extra time. We will make sure you have the slide deck, but join us. This is Megan's contact. She's actually on staff with us, and she's the one that wakes up thinking about this group coming together. I will also say that all of the data is available on our website. You can see a list of all the members who are there. We really have tweaked our website to be the storefront of the partnership, so there's enough data there to keep you up all night. Thank you very much. Together we can. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for your time. Yes, thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is the 2019 marijuana legislation. City Manager Gar, would you introduce the item, please?
Yes, our city attorney, Corey Hoffman, is going to walk you through some recent legislative changes and our approach in terms of bringing those different topics to you for direction.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, I'm actually going to only talk about substantively two of the three pieces of legislation that were in my memo. The issue regarding marijuana delivery, we're going to discuss on November 4th. And I wanted to just, in the past, when we have addressed issues related to marijuana that impacts our existing marijuana businesses, we've actually done outreach to those businesses and let them know that this was going to be on the agenda. So unless council objects, it's our intention to reach out to the marijuana business community, tell them that it's set for study session, and have them provide input, whether in person or however they decide to, in advance of the November 4th study session.
I think my person think we need to.
Okay.
Affect
Their businesses, so.
So tonight are two issues that frankly don't have to do with our current marijuana businesses, but are nonetheless issues that are triggered by the 2019 legislation. The first is the definition of open and public. When Amendment 64 was passed by the voters, there was a provision in Amendment 64 that said open and public consumption of marijuana was prohibited, but it was never defined. And so the city of Northglenn went ahead and did some work to define it at the time, and that is currently in your code section, and it's outlined in my memo. It's in 9-9-2, subsection E, subsection 2.
Give me a page.
It is page 2 of the memo.
Thank you.
It is block quoted. My ask of you tonight is to allow us to bring a very slight amendment now that the state has amended the definition of open and public to make it consistent with the state law definition. It will also allow the city to tweak its definition to better differentiate between the open and public consumption in the traditional sense and the open and public growing of marijuana, which has often been an issue in the city. We have an existing ordinance that says that marijuana has to be, for personal use, has to be done in a certain way, but the open and public definition has created some ambiguity. So taking the language from the state law will allow us to better enforce our regulation that allows people to do personal grows. So
just how it relates to personal growth?
Correct. So with your permission, we'd like to bring back a tweak to our open and public to make it consistent with state law.
I personally think we need to,
Because of all the issues that we're having right now. I know just in Ward 2. So, yeah, I think we do need to.
The second issue is really kind of an up or down as to whether you want us to do any work whatsoever. And that is that also, during the 2019 legislative session, there were two types of what I'm going to call tasting rooms or on-site marijuana consumption rooms that were authorized by the legislature. The first is a model that is essentially bring your own. And the second is I guess what I'd call a tasting model, which is you buy a limited amount and have it on site. So it's both a retail and tasting in one place. The other is bringing your own and tasting. They are both authorized, a local government is under no obligation to allow them within their city. And frankly, I didn't want to go forward with anything if there was no desire whatsoever for the city to have either model.
I struggle with this one because one of the biggest things that I don't really understand is how would you attend or be a patron at one of these businesses and then get home safely? I think it's probably one of my biggest concerns. Even if you're not even if you're like in the vicinity or like in there but not actually using, I feel like there's so many public safety concerns with that. It's probably one of my biggest concerns. Well, I mean, when you go to, I don't know, how long does it take to?
I don't know.
I mean, like you could have a beer and then drive home.
Could smoke a joint and drive home.
Can you?
I don't know the difference.
Would you be over the limit?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
I know that they're looking at ways to measure THC, and I think there's one way that they have now, but I don't know that. I mean, that's like a standard question. I don't know, and that's a question that I get a lot. You know, a shot of alcohol compared to a hit or a joint or whatever they want to do, you know? Is it comparable? I don't know, but I think that, I won't get too far on my soapbox, but I think that we have to quit treating them different because we don't understand it. I think we have to educate ourselves. And what I mean by differently is that we have plenty of bars, we have plenty of liquor stores, we do all this, right? But we don't look at helping them with their practices. We're there to raise the taxes, tell them that they can't be open during the same hours as bars or liquor stores and stuff like that. So from my perspective, we need to start looking at those things. And to what you were saying, Corey, I've met with two of our largest dispensary growers here in Northglenn. Both of them are, well, the one is making preparations in case we go to and allow the club atmosphere where you're coming in and it's a tasting room or something like that. The other one is looking at it. So I think that we at least have to look at the business type and then determine whether it's good for Northglenn or not. And then, you know, there are still going to be your businesses that will still allow rec and medical and not bring in this, like, I want to call it like a speakeasy, you know, this entertainment value of it. We're still going to have those, but there are several in the community that are interested in moving their business into these new areas.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
So I know that we have a setback limit for marijuana dispensaries. I assume that there's going to be a similar setback for these tasting rooms or consumption rooms?
We have not even gotten to first base. The whole idea of tonight was to
Just take it.
have a discussion about whether or not council even wants us to look at these, because if there is not an appetite for having either type of tasting room in Northglenn, then the city's under no obligation to create an ordinance that allows them. And so we can, in that situation, we don't have to get to first base. Now, much like recreational marijuana retail stores, the local government is given a great deal of authority where you could limit it not only with setbacks or distance limitations, you could have numerical limitations. You could say there's only one or two in the city. So if the city is inclined to do so, we can get to the next step of what it might look like to allow these types of consumption rooms.
So I guess I do concern about the issues that Julie brought up, but I'm at least open and willing to consider the logistics for the setup where you purchase and consume in the same location. I'm not in favor of a bring your own and consume on location.
So I'm in favor of exploring it in conversation, and I'll have two parts to say about that, but I share the same question around the distance.
Because there's one part of me that says if council's inclined to say, like, it's 1,000 feet distance, well, we kind of already are like nixing it, so, I mean, there's not really, we know on our map that there really isn't another location. And then kind of two-part to that is, do you know, like at the state level or anywhere else, do they say that the consumption bars or whatever can't be attached to the dispensary itself? Like, are they two separate entities completely?
Good question. So one kind is and one kind isn't. So the marijuana hospitality establishment is separate. It can be next door, but they are separate licensed premises.
Okay, so you're heading down to where I should have been more clear in my question. So we have the whole, you enter through this door and you enter through this door if you're retail or versus medical. So they could be next door to each other, but they have a separate entrance and they're a separate license and they're a separate.
Separate license. So the difference is with medical and rec, there is what's called a dual license. So it's one license that covers both. If you have a marijuana hospitality establishment, they would be absolutely separate licensed premise. You would essentially have to walk out of one and then go into the other with what you just purchased. That's with what is referenced as the MHE, or the marijuana hospitality establishment, the bring your own.
So where I had paused just a little bit on this, and I've always been very much pro marijuana,
So
so
I'll definitely say that. But where I hit pause on this is I think about some of our industrial strips, and tacking it on, in essence, could potentially, as long as they could get the space, basically wipes out a whole building that's dedicated to this one item. And then I think about having been in an industrial area with my business, parking issues that tend to happen in the industrial side, and so that whole consumption thing comes into play for me. And that's where I hit pause. So again, I'm open to entertaining the idea, but this one feels like there's a lot more to flesh out, and potentially I won't be fleshing it out. So.
Well, no, and there is, and that's why I wanted to have the initial conversation, because this is a very complicated area. I mean, the city has previously not addressed marijuana sales through zoning. Mm-hmm. It's just made it a general commercial use. But with a consumption room, you could say, for example, they're not allowed in industrial areas, hypothetically. I mean, there's a whole host of ways of regulating them. What the state has done that I think has made them more attractive for businesses is that they're an exception to the Colorado Clean Indoor Air Act. So in other words, it's the one way in which you can theoretically consume and smoke and not be violating the Clean Indoor Air Act. So that's what the 2019 legislation brought that makes things a little bit more attractive to the marijuana community.
I have two follow-up questions. One is, how do we prevent these tasting rooms from becoming the area that you drive by in Northglenn that smells like pot? Like, is there anything that's under our authority?
Absolutely. So if you smell it outside of the business, it's a nuisance, regardless of whether it's a regulated activity. So I think for those communities that end up having these, there will be things like significant filter requirements. But the fact that the business is allowed does not mean it can impact its neighbors.
And then my second question is, are these establishments, do they allow for the consumption of alcohol as well?
They do not.
Okay, so these are
the state
simply-
law, it is specifically prohibited
Okay.
in both models. So the legislature has said that alcohol and marijuana cannot be in the same location in terms of consumption.
Okay, thanks for that. Given that you just explained the difference between the two licenses and having essentially to purchase in one store, walk out, and then come around into the other potential.
Or purchase, frankly, in Denver
Right.
and bring it. I mean, but it's bring your own.
Okay. I think we should have the conversation and explore it and decide if this is the path we want to go down, and if there are guardrails that we can put in place. And if there's not, then we don't go down it. I think we should have the conversation. Are they really interested in having the conversation?
I'm not interested in having any conversation. I've been knocking doors and I've had a mouthful today about the marijuana businesses that are in Ward 4, and my constituency does not support it. I do not support it. There's no requirement to move forward. I say leave it alone. Because once you open Pandora's box, it's open. And anything can happen.
I still think that we need to have the conversation. And I'm not even to a point where I would say that I am for or against either of them. I need more information. If it turns out that, we decide, heck, let Thornton have that piece of business, we don't want anything to do with it, it's fine, but I don't want to look like the city that wouldn't even discuss it.
Okay, we can certainly put more detail together that wouldn't, again, it's just more information on what the options are. But frankly, all this did was summarize the legislation because I didn't want to go any further until I got at least some direction.
I do want you to talk about delivery.
No, November 4th, we will be talking
We'll
about.
talk about delivery too?
Yes.
Okay. I am very hesitant on that. I researched it and looked into it when I was in California because that's a big chunk of their business. I'm not so sure that it's something that I would ever want in my city, but I think that I would like to talk about it, so that we know what other cities may. I'm not saying that I'm the only one that can vote on that, but I'm just saying everything that I've read, everything that I've looked at, the laws in California, I am not for delivery, but again, I want to have the conversation. Because my constituents, they are for our marijuana shops. They understand that the taxes that they bring in are being used and what they're being used for. So I want to have the conversations.
Well, we're gonna have those conversations on November 4th. There's actually a number of different components because it's not only our businesses in the city and whether they can deliver, but whether businesses outside of Northglenn can deliver into Northglenn. So we'll bring all that back.
Okay, and you'll invite the different owners? Okay.
So I've got until I get another question.
How's that worked in the past when you all have engaged marijuana business owners in a study session? Have they sat around the table and given us feedback? Like, what does that look like? Or do they primarily just email and call us and tell us what they like and don't like?
I guess I'm the only one left on here that can answer that. We've done it a couple of different ways. Personally, I think one of our most successful times that we did it was we had kind of a roundtable discussion that we hosted at the M&O building. And I think at that time, the heavy discussion was around changing hours. It was probably like a year after we approved it. We invited everybody back and we had open conversation and discussion about things that impacted their hours and security. And I think I'm so proud that our marijuana businesses work so well together and they have good conversation. They see healthy competition. They get along. It has never been a nasty environment with them. I think they've contributed really well to some of the decisions that we've made. And then we've also had them here just giving input. I'm not sure that many of you have had the opportunity to even have a marijuana license come forward, but I also would say that a lot of times when we have had those licenses, other marijuana locations have come out in support of the other locations. So I think it's kind of gone all ways. But I would like to see it be that they get to put input. I don't want to be inviting them personally to just sit here and listen in. And I don't necessarily want their input later. I mean, I want their input later. I just mean I don't want them to have to go back and then send us their input because they couldn't give it to us while we were sitting here. I know it's kind of breaking the rules of a study session, but that would be my preference.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. No, could we do something similar to what Marcy outlined as like bringing everybody together and having a roundtable? Because I mean, this really is going to impact their industry and kind of the direction that it's going to go and how competitive they are within the region. And so I think that their voices should be part of this decision. And I too would love to hear what they have to say on the front end before we start diving into the logistics.
We can certainly do that.
And then I don't know. I want to hear them and understand them, but I also want to figure out, like, do we do a community stakeholder process as well, or a community meeting about it to try and figure out how we're weighing everybody's?
Well, I know that the city clerk's office is going to be also assisting in developing a whole bunch of information on delivery. They will have, I mean, from our experience in the past with these discussions, they have business issues that frankly we don't know and don't think of. Based on that back and forth, we can certainly at that point decide if you think there's more community input that's necessary, or whether we can go forward one way or the other.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks for sharing results.
As a closing remark, I would caution the council to consider what your constituents want, not what you want. Because that's who you represent, is your constituents, not your idea of what it is.
You are absolutely positively correct.
Just a caution.
I know. I've had calls from Ward 3, and I've had calls from Ward 2, and I've had calls from Ward 4. All positive in the fact that you're talking different issues than people who just sit around and get stoned. You're talking about your medical people who need it for pain, and you're talking about people who sit around and just get stoned. And they're everywhere in the city.
Okay.
So I've
Got what you need?
Got what I need.
Thank you, Corey. Hopefully we're going to get out of here before midnight, Heather. Next item is the proposed fireworks ordinance. City Manager Guy, would you introduce the item, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Escobar. So previously, staff brought forward a debrief discussion about, just simply put, the state of fireworks in Northglenn as a result of the 4th of July holiday. As you recall, we went ahead and moved forward with utilizing the International Fire Code and our ability to issue fines up to $2,650. We had a significant call volume over the 4th of July holiday. We know anecdotally from all of you talking with your constituents, as well as complaints that we've received here at City Hall, that fireworks are an issue in the city of Northglenn. So based on that previous conversation with City Council, I had received direction to have a draft ordinance brought forward, and we have a draft ordinance, and we'd like to get consensus from council if you would like us to bring that forward for first reading on October 14th as written, or with any suggested changes. But the ordinance is written based on the discussion that took place that evening, and I'll turn it over to Chief and Corey to dive into the details. The one piece that we don't have for you this evening that you did provide me with direction on is to create a communication strategy plan, and Diana and I spoke about that today, first day. And so as this ordinance moves forward, if that's council's desired direction, we will parallel that process along with it.
Mayor, Council, good evening. Actually, I'm just going to read the purpose real quick because I think it's real important for, start there. This proposal provides the Northglenn Police Department with a localized and targeted municipal-based option to effectively enforce violations for the sale, possession, and the use of fireworks within the city of Northglenn. Just like the city manager said, in the past we've just focused on International Fire Code, talking with the officers and everything else on this enforcement. We felt that we could do a better job because the International Fire Code and our state code are kind of in conflict. So the state allows fountains and other things. That's why you see a lot of the fireworks stand.
Things that don't leave the ground, essentially.
And the International Fire Code is much more restrictive. Even sparklers under the International Fire Code are illegal. So I thought we could have something, talking with Corey, that would benefit the city of Northglenn. It would be, for us, we're also pioneering one of those. So if any citizen shoots fireworks off from their house, they can be cited. Some of the enforcement problems that we ran into this year is that we'd get calls and we'd see the fireworks going off, or the neighbors would see the fireworks going off in the backyard. We'd knock on the door, nobody would answer, so we couldn't really see who was in possession or who actually was shooting off those fireworks. So now the owner or the renter who's responsible for that residence, we can go back later and actually issue a summons for that. So I think that's going to be also a big help for us on deterring this, the fireworks complaints that we get every year. The other thing too is what was real important is the mandatory minimum fines. So we can actually, and really that's one of the things that we really need to market, because we don't want any surprises next year. So we want our citizens to know well in advance, and that's on every aspect that we get that word out, that they understand that if they get cited, for a fireworks complaint, they can, and I think our first violation that we have today is $1,000 that's in the ordinance. So I want to make sure that they're well aware that if they're caught shooting off fireworks, it's a hefty fine. So did you want to talk about the ordinance at all?
The only thing I would add is that this is treated like a nuisance. And so what I mean by that is that if you have nuisance conditions at your property, and you have, for example, a tenant, it is not only the tenant that may be responsible for the nuisance, it may be the owner as well. So one of the more kind of unusual and onerous provisions of this draft ordinance, because of the inability oftentimes to find the individuals who actually use the fireworks, is to make anyone who owns or possesses property responsible for fireworks that leave that property. So that may mean that an absentee owner who has a tenant that fires off fireworks will be cited. It is intended to be a significant deterrent to address the shooting off of fireworks on a property where you can't locate who did it. And that is a very common problem, whether it is people not answering the doors or whether it is being able to see the property from which the fireworks came, but then you can't find the individual that actually shot them off. So as a manner of proof, because we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, what we have to prove is that fireworks came from that property, not that Jenny fired the fireworks.
What if someone's letting them off in the street? Like I kind of saw happen this last year. I mean, if you came through the neighborhood, you would think that I did it, but I didn't do it. It was the people next door to me that did it. But they left all their trash.
Again, that's, a challenge where we actually have, and then it falls back on possession or who actually shot them off. And if we don't have a witness or we didn't come around the corner and see who that individual doing that, then we couldn't issue a summons.
This is not going to solve every problem. Okay. So if someone fires off a firework in the street and no one is willing to come forward as a witness, we can't prove it. And that was one of the significant issues this past year, is that people don't want to essentially write out a complaint against their neighbor. If it's coming from a particular property, they won't have to anymore. But if it's coming from the street or another place that's not a particular property, we'll still have enforcement issues.
So there will be an opportunity for the homeowner or for somebody to say, that wasn't me, look at my videotape or something like that?
If it's in the street, yes.
Okay.
If you own or possess the property, you are presumed responsible.
It's in their driveway.
Then, so like Meredith's problem where she walked by and they were having it all in their driveway, doesn't matter who set it off, the owner.
Yeah, who's the homeowner?
Is it and or?
Or.
It's or.
So it can be both.
Okay.
Marcy?
I think we started to talk about this idea. So under the new ordinance, if we had a section of the app that was dedicated to fireworks, and I'm afraid of my neighbor, and I don't want to report it because I don't want to cause drama, but I want to report it. Can I submit it through the app like a photo And I don't have to be an official witness then, or do I still have to be an official witness? I just was,
Yeah,
the
unfortunately,
law
you
thing,
still
got
have
it.
to be a witness. But one of the things too is that I think this app, we want to roll that out as well. You know, because there's houses that've been doing it. I heard in Fox Run that, you know, where they shut down a whole cul-de-sac, and if this has been going on for years, if you have a neighbor that you know, oh, they just got back from Wyoming, and they're gonna set them off, you know, you can let us know, so we can put that on that focus area of complaints, and then we can narrow down, because sometimes it's very difficult to find out what house, right? We get calls, hey, there's fireworks complaints, and we go in the neighborhood and they're going off, but to narrow it down to that, you know, house is tough, because sometimes those fireworks are 100 feet above, you know, above the houses, so you don't know exactly which house they came from. So the more information that we get from residents of, hey, this is a household that shoots them off, we're able to hone in better in that, you know, that area to, you know, target them. So
I think that's just the tough one because, I mean, I know just on my own block, we had a literal fight between residents, like physical fight because somebody
Well,
reported
that's a
them.
whole
So
new level too, so.
I know,
that's-
but like it's because they reported them and that like got to a whole nother step there. And so I think there's people that don't want to report because you just, I mean, you don't want to be the one that is getting.
And I think we're gonna have that avenue on our, you know, our website and everything else, so, and that could be anonymous.
Well, but here's the other thing. This isn't going to be 100% effective, certainly. But if I'm the neighbor who sees fireworks being shot off and I call, it is an easier law enforcement tactic, whether it is a police officer or a code enforcement officer, and I know it's not a lot of extra people, but it's some extra people, to not have to find the individual, but simply see the property that's where it's being shot off from. So if I call the police and I want to be anonymous, but I say the property at this location is shooting off fireworks, and the police observe that, then you may not need the witness because the police have observed it. And it's a lot easier to observe it coming from a property than having an individual.
I still like the app idea. I think it's still
No,
worth
that's
moving
still,
forward.
that's still a go. It's gonna be similar to the graffiti, so that's how we can roll that out. I thought that would be a great way to do that, so.
I still ain't going off in one. I can't tell you where they're coming from, like every night, 10 o'clock.
So the officer still has to observe the fireworks being shot off from a property before an individual is issued a summons?
Or a neighbor if they're willing to be the witness.
Okay. How, like, that's so tricky for me, right? Because if Julie and I lived next door to each other and we had a fight and Julie's like, oh, Jenny's setting off fireworks, I saw her.
I mean, I hate to say this, but this is the type of stuff that code enforcement deals with all the time, with weeds.
I know you
so
can
it's
observe the weeds, you can observe the cars without license plates.
Sometimes it's behind
Yeah, if you're
fence and that's where.
if you're peeking over your if you have
Yeah.
a two-story home and you're looking down and you see who knows what in your neighbor's backyard, it's a significant issue that happens even now. You're the only one that sees it, you know it's illegal, you have to report it in order for a complaint to be
And
prosecuted.
the evidence too, I mean, when we go there, it's someone that, oh, they're shooting off, and then we talk to other neighbors, no, they weren't shooting it off. Video too, the phone, I mean, how quick people are on those phones. I mean, they can get a quick video if they're shooting them off and show. So I still think we have to, again, we have the responsibility to prove the unreasonable doubt that it happened. I mean, do people, like you said, I mean, revenge type stuff, and it does happen, unfortunately. Luckily, not as much as in this community, you know, but we've had it happen before. So, but I'm hoping we get, officers do a good job with interviewing people out there, come up with the truth, and then, make the right decision on issuance of a summons.
Okay, my next question is, I seem to remember that the maximum fine was significantly higher this year than what we're seeing in the proposed ordinance. Is that, can you talk about the genesis of that and how you got here?
Go ahead. So, when there's a crime committed for municipal ordinance, there's a band.
the judge has, the ability to, fine someone from a certain amount to, and that's the maximum amount that our ordinance is allowed to, to fine someone on violation of ordinance. And that's why it was the max amount fine that our municipal court can deliver.
We conveyed to the municipal judge council's concerns with fireworks, and in fact, she was here for one of the meetings where you all discussed the concerns about having high fines. But we did not have in our ordinance a mandatory minimum fine. And so she still had the discretion to impose a fine she determined appropriate, regardless of, if the 9 of you said we want a maximum, she's got the judicial discretion under our existing ordinance to make a decision. Under this ordinance, it would take away some of that discretion because you would actually have the mandatory minimums in the ordinance itself.
Was she consulted with this structure that was outlined?
No.
Is there a reason why we didn't consult her?
We certainly can, but I think mandatory minimums are not uncommon. It's a way that a legislative body can convey the importance of a particular provision.
I just had a little bit of anxiety about the mandatory fine being $1,000. Like, I know we want to crack down on fireworks, but I feel like it's more of an issue of enforcement than it is on, I don't know, a massive fine, because we had that $2,600 fine, I think this year, that was advertised everywhere, and I don't know that made a difference. And I think about, maybe there are some grandkids setting off fireworks at grandma's house, and grandma gets slapped with a $1,000 fee and is on a fixed income, and so, like, those are the kind of situations that I want to avoid. Like, was the behavior wrong on behalf of the young people setting off fireworks? Absolutely, but is that really? I don't know. I just have some uneasiness about the mandatory minimums, I guess.
Well, and that's it. It only works if it's a deterrent, and there's the number and then the enforcement. And this year, the actual fines imposed were not the number that the council had asked that it be conveyed to the judge.
What were they? Yeah.
They were significantly less. It was based on, I believe that she tried to determine the number of fireworks that were observed at a particular location and did her fine schedule that way. The one thing I want to identify, though, is with someone on a fixed income and a mandatory minimum, there is still ability to pay provisions that the judge has to follow to work through. So it may, whether it is time to pay, whether it is alternatives to work it off, under a bunch of new legislation, someone can't go to jail for an inability to pay. So we have those protections in place. But frankly, the guts of this ordinance, from what I think the chief has experienced and the city has experienced, is that without a significant deterrent fine, the problem's going to continue, and that's why the recommendation.
Can I ask a question? One to your comment, Jenny. Just because I have one of those people in my family, the first time he laughed off his ticket from Thornton for setting off fireworks, that was $750. He laughed it off. He paid it. It's Emily's boyfriend. Sorry. The second time he got it, which he just got it last year, it'll never happen again. Because then Thornton turned around and tripled that fine from the first month. But my question to you, or from the year before, my question to you is, with this minimum fine, can they qualify still for community service? Anything, they can still qualify for community service?
Correct.
Okay.
Did you consider the use of your $5,000 drone?
Oh, to do that? I'm still working on that. I still think, I'm just nervous that they'll shoot it down. So, but yeah, that would identify, some of those problems.
Well, if you have a problem area,
Yeah.
Like in major cities, if there's a riot or a big fight, the drones are up there, they're focused on that area and that area alone. So I'm not saying that You should fly around the city looking for somebody.
Well, one of the things with the forfeiture fund that we have, that's one of my first purchases I'm going to be asking for is the drone. So maybe we can implement that next year in some of our hot spots that we've
We'll be sure to
identified.
fly over your house.
What? Marcy?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a good first step in addressing the problem.
So this isn't really specific of the ordinance per se, but you know, it's one of those things where each ward has a situation, and we are very aware that Fox Run had a higher level of situation over there. And I just can't help but keep coming back to where does the city have some kind of ability to apply some pressure to the community there to look at what they can do. Like, it's an HOA. I mean, what are they able to, I mean, if they're not going to take it seriously either, then why is it just about us having to deal with that?
We've reached out to HOA, so
Right.
they're more than willing to, print some of the stuff out there. Again, I think it's very important to let our residents know that this is coming, and it's a heavy fine, $1,000 if you get caught, with fireworks.
Well, we
So
can
don't.
start it in June.
But I can tell you, on 4th of July, we're still gonna have. No, I know that. We're gonna start. I mean, we're gonna, get the
Right away.
information out right. As soon as you guys pass it, I can tell you we're gonna start putting it on our social media. I'll get with Diane, and we'll figure out how we get it out to all our residents and make sure they're aware of it. But again, even with this ordinance and with the fines, we're still going to get fireworks complaints. And so it's not going to quiet the whole city, but I'm hoping it reduces it a whole lot, and I think it will.
I think the first year that they find out that we're serious and really fining people that are caught, it'll get better and better and better. A $50 fine isn't going to stop somebody from doing fireworks.
Well, and we'll need to be prepared for pushback and negative feedback on the communication front with this, and that's part of what Diana will develop a strategy for us to help respond to that. If you think about the cost per hour of a police officer, and Chief in the last discussion we had talked about our limited resources and the focus on our City 4th of July event at the park across the street, and then the difficult we had in actually having officers in Fox Run because of the traffic issue with Thornton. We won't have that this next year, but in any given year, we're gonna have limited resources. And so, it's up to council, how far do you wanna go with this? And how big of a problem do you think it is? I mean, this ordinance was designed and written in response to this is a problem. We're not going to solve every instance and use of fireworks in the city, but will it send a message to our citizenry who are really upset and tired of the nuisance? I think so. But we're still going to have to, Chief is still going to have to deploy officers in specific areas. So that's regardless. And as you mentioned, it's a year-round problem, more significant leading up to the 4th of July holiday and even after the 4th of July holiday. But it all comes back to how significant of a problem does council think this is, and what do you want the consequence to be? We tried the approach under the International Fire Code with a maximum fine of $2,650, and it didn't work.
I have to wonder, 2,600, it was a lot, but why did we drop it down to just 2,000 for if they had it, I believe it says if they had it twice in 2 years, it could be a minimum of 2,000? Third violation within a 2-year period.
Well, again, this is a suggestion from us. I mean, as council, you guys can come up with the penalties that you deem appropriate.
So we're putting this in the nuisance category and trying to be strategic about not having it so significant, but also understanding that this is a mandatory minimum, which we have not had that structure. And so this is a legislative body, once that's an individual cited, they'll go through the court process and go through the judicial process. But based on looking at what other cities have in place, and you mentioned anecdotally the Thornton piece, this is our recommendation as a starting point. I think it's something that we can track and see, how many citations get issued, what does that look like through the process? Is there a need to increase or potentially decrease? I don't know. But it's a first step.
I assume that we're all on board with bringing this forward?
So we'll bring this forward on October 14th for first reading.
The next item is the strategic planning follow-up. City Manager Garland, would you introduce the item?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor Escobar. So included in your packet is the next iteration, near final iteration of the strategic planning document. I did pull out, for simplicity purposes, as we really went through and worked with each strategic goal, having the performance measures at the end of each section made it really lengthy, and I need to spend more time with my leadership team and really refining what those performance measures look like. So you can see in the staff memo, I recapped the changes that I was directed by council on bringing forward. So, for example, on page 14 of your packet, I had previously recommended a mission statement and received feedback to make that more of a commitment statement. And so that's something I need council's reaction to. And then one piece of feedback was whether or not let me back up, on the business retention and growth goal, it was recommended that we develop a new icon. So if you look at page 15 of the packet, there's a new icon for business retention and growth that we've developed in-house. Also, with housing opportunities, there was quite a bit of discussion about whether or not we had enough action underneath that particular goal. And so I spent quite a bit of time fleshing out additional things that are underway that I think fit underneath housing opportunities, and am looking for council direction if you want to keep the housing goal. My recommendation to you is that you keep housing opportunities as a standalone goal, because I think after beefing it up, in not so many words, you have more to work with there. We did make some photo tweaks to diverse community that I don't need to go into. Sustainability goal 7, we did remove the financial component that I had recommended, and there was a couple financial related action steps included, and I shifted that to high performance government. So I'm looking for feedback on, are we almost there with the different pieces? You can see that I really, we made an effort to really simplify and be consistent based on the feedback about voice. So each item has that numeric number, and then the topic header, and then the specific bullets. And then we went through and really tried to identify a target date using quarters. In a couple instances, I have specific dates because those are upcoming discussions, such as the traffic calming discussion. I think I specifically have October 21st, 2019 on there, but otherwise we're using years and quarters to really set milestones. The other piece, in the past, my understanding is that city councils have adopted the strategic plan via resolution. So I am looking for direction from council tonight if you would like to do that, or if it's more, I have your consensus that it's done and we can move forward. And or if you want to do it more formally via a resolution. I have outlined the next steps of what we will be doing in terms of promotion of the strategic plan, and that includes possibly a resolution developing a one-page front and back summary for council to use when you're out in the community and have available via the website. Also updating the framed document that you see behind you on the wall, creating an updated version of that to promote City Council's vision. I also have that post-strategic planning evaluation, which I plan to get out via SurveyMonkey by mid-October on the overall facilitation. And then I'll be gearing up to solicit interest from facilitators to start our next process, either December or January after the election.
Okay. Anybody? Marcy?
Let me get this one out because I forgot to tell you about this.
So as I was reading through it, something about the way that it was formatted this time and some of the wording just really drew my attention to things that I'm like, I bet a resident doesn't even know this. And in particular, the water conservation 7.4, I don't think we do a very good job of promoting any of the rebates and those types of programs. And those are such easy social media filler contents. It just would be nice to be able to let residents know that we offer those. And I think we have some other police-driven rebates, like with the safes, and I think that has just fallen off the radar. So I mentioned that, and then I think the changes in the format were good. I still would prefer that it be one document. I think you put a lot of work into this, you and staff both, and it definitely shows that you've been putting that effort forward.
By one document, Jamie.
Well, I guess I was confused with your comment about that you pulled it out because it was getting long about the performance measures. And you're still working on it, so are those gonna?
They'll be in
make their way back?
appendix.
Okay, got it.
I'm good. Any comments, Julie?
A question about the, page 18. Address the impact of increasing poverty as well as concerns by residents about homelessness. Is that like an ongoing thing, or what does it really mean?
I think we need to really figure out what that means, in the sense of we need to take the next steps. So I don't have a specific, are we really doing that right now? I don't think we are. We hear about it at ward meetings, and I hear, I know all of you do, when you're talking with residents, but I think I've re-engaged our internal task force and expanded it. I'm having discussions with the county. I met with Paulo on Friday. I had to push the conference call with Kristen Tomes with the state office. She's with the Office of Homelessness within DOLA. And so we're going to be meeting as all part of TEEN of that November 4th discussion on homelessness. So in terms of, I think we're hearing the impacts, but are we addressing them currently? There's certain things that we're doing, but I think that's all tied into the November 4th discussion. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What more would you like to see us do? And what is it going to take to do that? Not only on more of a local level, but what does that look like as a regional partner with the county and potentially the state? So that's why I don't have an ongoing, or I think we're in very much a reactionary mode to a certain degree. The city has done things, so I don't want to make it sound like we have not done anything, because that's not what I'm saying. But I think it's complaint driven, and so how do we strike a better balance between reactive and proactive, and then really if council provides me with this direction to get to more of the regional partnership level of addressing different issues from a housing perspective and so forth, and what else are we not, what else needs to be part of the conversation?
Is there a date for the Civic 101 or the President Academy?
Do you want to touch on that one, Joanna?
Sorry, I don't have that pulled up.
I think you had put
included a quarter.
Q2 or Q3 of next year. It's, it is under, it's on page 20.
Yeah, so the current schedule accounts for us planning the curriculum for that Civics 101 program in the first quarter of next year, and then planning and hosting the actual academy. It says Q2 or Q3, based on best practices that we've reviewed so far. It would most likely be Q3, according to when the timing works for most residents. So that's the current schedule for that program.
So actually next year, you can have your first
2020, yep.
Wow, that's cool.
Marcy?
You asked us a question about whether or not we want to do a resolution. Is that something that we have to do, or did we just kind of, were we doing this just because we've always done it that way?
Yes. I mean, I think it has been done that way in the past. I don't know that the latest work plan was adopted via resolution. I don't think it was, but if you go back to
I
the
remember doing it
2014, let's see, I have a copy of that Joanna pulled up. So it can be done that way. Does it have to be done that way? I don't think so. It's really council's prerogative in terms of how formal do you want to be with the adoption of the plan. Certainly it's meant to be a living and breathing document, subject to change based on a variety of things. But I think adopting it via resolution perhaps sends, a message to the community and amongst yourselves that there's support.
If we adopt, excuse me, if we adopt it as a resolution, then we have to come back to make any changes. If we leave it like it is as a living document, you can just make changes. Is that correct?
It really depends on how you want to have it structured. I mean, I would recommend that if you adopt it via resolution, it's with the caveat that time deadlines can shift, and I wouldn't want you to have to come back and formally add things, because really the intent is for this to be an annual process. And so those are my thoughts. Certainly open to whatever direction council wants to provide on this one.
Do you have?
I think it sort of makes sense not to do it because it changes so much. I think it's just different in the way that this is structured as to how it was in the past, and I mean, the dates and that sort of thing. I feel like our strategic plan in the past didn't necessarily get into the weeds of that. So I think it's just a difference in approving. I think it just kind of said what it was.
It did get very detailed. Yeah.
That I don't remember that.
Yeah. So part of what I am intentionally trying to do is elevate the conversation to where this is more of a strategic planning document, knowing that, like, if you look at the 2014 plan, there is a tactical item implement TOD plan, and it had specific milestones. And you can do all of that work up front, but really this is intended to be a visioning document, and things are going to ebb and flow. So I view this more from my perspective, and this is not a criticism, this is just my perspective on it, is more of a detailed work plan underneath the umbrella of the vitalization goal vision that's up there. So, what I would envision is council is setting the goals within the overall vision that you've developed. And then as we move from year to year, things shift. They'll fall off because they're completed, or they'll stay if there's additional action pieces to it, and then new things are added.
Julie, do you have an opinion?
I don't mind doing a resolution on it. I think, honestly, I kind of feel like I wanted to come back to council. The fact that we're all sparse tonight. On top of the fact that, I don't, because Joyce wasn't at our last strategic planning meeting, so I know that it's each council member's duty to, go through the packet and like see if you have any questions or something, but I wouldn't mind it coming back, then it just kind of makes it more official if you or make sure that you see that council is supportive of this.
It puts the bow on it, the seal.
Yeah.
I want it to come back.
Okay.
Okay.
Got that?
So I'm gonna have Diana review it because she's a fresh set of eyes, and I've been working with this very closely the last several weeks. So we'll make any tweaks to grammar. Hopefully there's not typos in there, but like I said, I've been working with it very closely. If you see anything that you have questions about, I would just ask that you email me, let me know, and then we'll refine the performance measure piece of it. That'll be included as an appendix. And then I'll strive to bring this back on October 14th, if not October 28th, for council support.
Okay. Any other items for council?
Can I ask Heather a question? Is Grady still working with the city, or are we working on a transition plan to move her on and just have Diana?
So there's a transition plan. So Grady is really leaving it up to Diana in terms of what level of support she needs. There's certainly going to be more conversation this week than probably next week and the week after, but Grady will be available on a reduced scale from a cost perspective to us over the next month. Diana's really hit the ground running. So originally when Grady and I talked about this transition period, we really had targeted a whole month. I don't know that Diana's going to need a whole month of support from Grady, but certainly, I'm committed to making sure that there's a solid foundation and that Diana has the support she needs. We're at a good place in terms of this transition, and that was very strategic and intentional on our part. So we're really coming off of the big 50th event, really now focused on what the remainder of the year looks like from a 50th perspective, and focus on standard operating procedures. Diana delving into the 18-month communication strategy, getting to know staff, learning the community, learning the organization, and I don't have any doubt that she'll do a great job on that. And so I think Grady's time will be very minimal.
So when we executed our contract with her, was it a flat monthly rate contract that we did with her, or were we actually paying hourly rates to her? And do you see it moving to hourly rates or something?
It was a flat monthly rate within a range based on the number of hours. So that really depended on like a min to max amount. I have not talked to her specifically because this is in flux. I can certainly revisit that with her and see if an hourly rate's more suitable for this transition phase, because I don't think she's going to need to provide as much support as we originally envisioned. So that's something I'll look at. I understand what you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and I guess we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.